Bitter cold wind rushed through the nearly empty auto repair shop as Jake wiped grease off his hands. Another long day, another struggling customer. Then she walked in, shivering, holding a little boy's hand. "Please, my car won't start, and I have no one else to ask." Her voice was soft but filled with quiet desperation. Jake looked at her worn-out coat, the worry in her eyes. He had no idea that fixing her car would change his life forever. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. Jake exhaled, rubbing his cold hands together as he looked at the woman standing before him. Her coat was too thin for the weather, and the little boy beside her clung to her side, his small fingers gripping her sleeve. There was exhaustion in her eyes, a weariness that came from carrying burdens too heavy for one person. She hesitated before speaking again, as if afraid of being turned away. "My car, it won't start," she said softly. "I don't have much money, but I need to get home. My son—" She glanced down at the boy, swallowing hard. "I just need some help." Jake had seen plenty of desperate people walk into his shop, but something about her made him pause. Maybe it was the way she held herself, as if she had been let down too many times before. Maybe it was the way her son looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Let me take a look," Jake said, grabbing his tools. She exhaled in relief, nodding quickly. "Thank you. I really appreciate this." They stepped outside, the cold wind biting against Jake's skin as he walked over to the old sedan parked near the curb. He could tell at a glance that it had seen better days. The faded paint, the dents along the side, the worn-out tires. It was clear this car had been holding on for dear life. Jake popped the hood, examining the engine. It didn't take him long to figure out the problem. The battery was almost dead, and there was a leak in the radiator. Fixing it would take time, and she probably couldn't afford what it would cost. He turned to her. "Your battery's weak, and there's a leak in the radiator. It's not safe to drive like this." Her face fell. "Oh." She hesitated, biting her lip. "How much would it be to fix?" Jake could already see the answer in her eyes. She was bracing herself for bad news. "Don't worry about it," he said before he could stop himself. "I'll take care of it." Her eyes widened. Jake shook his head. "I won't let you and your kid freeze out here. Give me a little time, and I'll get it running again." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to understand why a stranger would help without asking for anything in return. Then finally she nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake got to work, tightening bolts, patching the leak as best he could, and replacing the battery with a spare he had in the shop. It was not a perfect fix, but it would get her home safely. As he worked, he heard her talking to her son, trying to keep him warm. He couldn't shake the thought that she had been through a lot more than she was letting on. After an hour, Jake wiped his hands on his rag and closed the hood. "It's good to go," he said. She pulled her son close. "I don't know how to thank you." Jake just smiled. "Just drive safe." She nodded, but there was something unreadable in her expression. As she got into the car and started the engine, she hesitated before pulling away, looking at Jake as if she wanted to say something. Then with a final grateful nod, she drove off into the night. Jake watched her go, feeling strangely unsettled. He had no idea that in just a few days, this small act of kindness would come back to him in a way he never could have imagined. The next morning, Jake wiped the sleep from his eyes as he stepped into his shop. The scent of motor oil and metal filled the air, the same as it had for years. It was just another day, or at least that was what he thought. He had nearly forgotten about the woman and her son until he saw something on his workbench, a small envelope with his name on it. He frowned, picking it up. It was light, barely weighing anything. He tore it open, pulling out a neatly folded piece of paper. The handwriting was careful, but had a slight shake to it, as if the person writing it had been nervous. "Jake, I don't know how to repay you for what you did. You didn't have to help me, but you did anyway. People like you are rare, and I just wanted to say, thank you. I hope someday I can return the kindness you showed me." There was no name, but he didn't need one. He knew exactly who it was from. Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't used to being thanked. Not like this. Most people got their cars fixed, paid, and left without a second thought. But this felt different. Shaking his head, he tucked the note into his pocket and got to work. The hours passed in a blur of repairs, oil changes, and customer complaints. It was business as usual until late afternoon when the shop door swung open and a man in a crisp suit stepped inside. Jake barely spared him a glance at first. It wasn't often that guys in expensive suits walked into his shop, and when they did, they usually had no idea what they were looking for. But then, the man cleared his throat, and Jake finally looked up. "Are you Jake Carter?" the man asked. "Yeah," Jake replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Who's asking?" The man pulled out a business card and handed it over. Jake glanced down, his eyes narrowing at the company name printed in bold letters. It was a major corporation, one he had heard of but never had any connection to. "My employer is looking to hire experienced mechanics," the man continued. "We've heard good things about you." Jake frowned. "From who?" The man smiled slightly. "Let's just say someone was very impressed with your work. Are you interested in a better opportunity?" Jake hesitated. This felt too sudden, too unexpected. Opportunities like this didn't just fall into his lap. He had been running this small shop for years, scraping by, never expecting more than what he had. "What kind of job are we talking about?" he asked cautiously. "A lead mechanic position," the man said. "Better pay, benefits, a team under you." Jake let out a low whistle. It sounded too good to be true. "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "I run this place. It's not much, but it's mine." The man nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Think about it. No rush." He handed Jake another card. "Call me if you're interested." Then with a polite nod, he turned and walked out. Jake stared at the card, his mind racing. This wasn't just some random job offer. Someone had gone out of their way to make sure he got this chance. And deep down, he had a feeling he knew exactly who it was. Jake sat in his small office, staring at the business card still resting on his desk. It had been hours since the man in the suit had left, but his words kept repeating in Jake's mind. A lead mechanic position, better pay, benefits. It was the kind of offer he had never even considered before. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. Something about this whole thing felt strange. Opportunities like this didn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone had put in a word for him, and there was only one person who came to mind, the woman whose car he had fixed. Shaking his head, he stood and walked back into the shop. He had work to do. Letting his mind get caught up in possibilities wouldn't help anything. He had customers waiting, cars that needed repairs, and bills that weren't going to pay themselves. The day passed in a blur, but no matter how hard he tried to focus, the thought still lingered. Why would she do this? Who was she really? By the time he closed up for the night, his curiosity had gotten the best of him. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang twice before the same man from earlier answered. "This is Daniel speaking." "It's Jake Carter," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I wanted to ask something." There was a brief pause. "Go ahead." "Who told you about me?" Jake asked. "Was it that woman? The one with the kid?" Daniel chuckled lightly. "I can't say." Jake frowned. "Why not?" "Because she asked me not to." Jake exhaled. That only confirmed what he already knew. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but I need to know why she did this." Another pause, then Daniel sighed. "She's not just some random customer, Jake." Something in his tone made Jake's stomach tighten. "Then who is she?" "You'll find out soon enough," Daniel said. "She wants to meet with you personally. Are you free tomorrow?" Jake hesitated. A part of him wanted to ignore all of this, to pretend nothing had changed. But another part of him needed answers. "Yeah," he finally said. "Where?" "I'll text you the address." The call ended, leaving Jake with more questions than before. He had no idea what he was walking into, but there was only one way to find out. The next day he drove across town, following the GPS directions until he pulled up in front of a towering glass building. It was the headquarters of the very company printed on the business card. Jake stepped out of his truck, feeling out of place in his oil-stained jeans and work boots. He walked through the glass doors and almost immediately, a receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. "Mr. Carter?" Yeah, he said. She's expecting you. Right this way. Jake followed the receptionist through a sleek hallway until they stopped in front of an office with floor-to-ceiling windows. The door was slightly open, and as he stepped inside, his breath caught. Sitting behind a massive desk was the woman he had helped just days ago. Except now she wasn't wearing a worn-out coat. She was dressed in a tailored blazer, her hair neatly styled. The exhaustion in her eyes was still there, but now there was something else. Certainty, control. She looked up and smiled. Jake, I'm glad you came. Jake stared at her, his mind racing. This wasn't just some struggling single mom. She was the owner of the company that had offered him a job. Jake felt like the air had been knocked out of him. He had spent days wondering why she had helped him, why she had gone out of her way to get him a job offer. But never in his wildest dreams had he imagined this. The woman whose car he had fixed wasn't just another struggling single mom. She was the owner of the company that had sent Daniel to recruit him. His throat felt dry as he stepped further into the office. You own this place? She nodded, standing up from her chair. Yes, my name is Olivia Hart. I founded this company 10 years ago. Jake ran a hand through his hair. This doesn't make sense. If you own a company like this, why were you driving that car? Why did you need my help? Olivia smiled, but there was a sadness behind it. Because life isn't as simple as it looks from the outside, she said. I built this company from the ground up, but that doesn't mean I'm immune to problems. That day I was on my way to pick up my son from school when my car broke down. I was stranded, and I had no one to call. Jake frowned. No one? What about employees, assistants? Olivia shook her head. I don't like to depend on others for personal matters, and to be honest, I didn't want anyone to see me struggling. She let out a small sigh. But then you showed up, and you didn't ask questions. You didn't judge me. You just helped. Jake shifted on his feet. You didn't have to do all this. The job offer, everything. I was just doing what anyone else would have done. She tilted her head. That's where you're wrong, Jake. Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have spent their own money to make sure I got home safely. She folded her arms. Do you know how hard it is to find good, honest people these days? Jake exhaled. I don't know about all that. Olivia smiled. Well, I do, and that's why I want you to take the job. Jake hesitated. Look, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm cut out for some big corporate mechanic position. She walked around the desk, standing just a few feet from him. It's not just any position. I need someone I can trust to oversee a brand new division I'm opening. A place where people like you, mechanics who actually care, can do good work and be treated right. Jake stared at her. You're serious? As serious as I have ever been, she said. This isn't just about repaying a favor. This is about giving the right people the right opportunities. Jake felt something stir in his chest. He had spent years working in his small shop, scraping by, barely making enough to keep things running. The idea of something bigger, something better, it scared him. But at the same time, it excited him. I don't know, he admitted. It's a big change. Olivia nodded. I won't pressure you, but at least think about it. Jake sighed, rubbing his jaw. Yeah, I'll think about it. As he left the office, his mind was racing. For the first time in years, he had a choice. Stay where he was, or take a leap into something new. And for the first time, he wasn't sure which path to take. Jake spent the next few days trying to push the job offer out of his mind, but it refused to leave. Every time he picked up a wrench, every time he wiped his hands on an old rag, every time he looked around his tiny shop with its flickering lights and outdated equipment, he thought about the chance Olivia had given him, about the future he could have if he just took the leap. But the fear of change was strong. This shop, as worn down as it was, had been his life for years. He had built a reputation, earned the trust of his customers, and even if money was tight, it was his. Walking away felt like turning his back on everything he had worked for. Still, the words Olivia had said stuck with him. Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have helped. The world needed more people who actually cared. Late one evening, as Jake locked up for the night, he saw a familiar car pull up outside. Olivia stepped out, dressed casually this time. nothing like the powerful executive he had met in her office. She smiled as she walked toward him. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," she said. Jake shook his head. "Not at all. Something wrong with your car again?" She chuckled. "No, not this time." She leaned against the hood. "I just wanted to see if you thought about my offer." Jake sighed, crossing his arms. "I have, and honestly, I don't know. This shop, it's my life. It's all I've ever known." She nodded. "I get that, and I respect it." She glanced around, taking in the worn-out building, the dimly lit garage, the old tools scattered inside. "But let me ask you something, Jake. Do you ever feel like you were meant for more than just this?" Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you spend your days fixing cars, helping people, doing honest work. But what if you could do even more? What if you could take your skills and use them to change lives on a bigger scale?" She paused. "I'm not asking you to abandon what you've built. I'm asking you to take everything that makes you a great mechanic and bring it somewhere that can give you more in return." Jake looked away, his chest tightening. "I just don't know if I belong in a place like that." Olivia smiled. "You belong there the moment you chose to help a stranger without expecting anything in return." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had never thought of himself as anything special. But maybe, just maybe, he had been selling himself short. He took a deep breath. "If I say yes, what happens next?" Olivia's face lit up. "Then we get to work, together." Jake looked at his shop one last time, then back at Olivia. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a different future, a better one. And this time, he wasn't afraid to take the leap. Jake took a deep breath as he stepped into the new facility Olivia had told him about. It was nothing like his small, rundown garage. The place was massive, with state-of-the-art equipment, bright overhead lights, and a workspace so clean it barely looked like a mechanic's shop. He had never seen anything like it. "You okay?" Olivia asked, standing beside him. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, just taking it all in." She smiled. "I know it's a lot, but this place is yours to run. I meant it when I said I needed someone I could trust. And after everything I've seen, I know you're the right person for this." Jake swallowed hard. "It still doesn't feel real." "Well, it is. And the best part? You won't just be fixing cars, you'll be running a team, training mechanics, giving opportunities to people who need them." She paused, watching his expression. "You told me once that all you wanted was to do honest work and help people. This is your chance to do that, on a much bigger scale." Jake exhaled. "You really think I can handle all this?" Olivia nodded. "I don't just think so, I know so." Jake let her words sink in. A part of him still hesitated, still clung to the familiarity of his old life. But another part of him, the part that had dreamed of something more, something better, was ready. Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into the job. He learned how to manage a team, worked alongside mechanics who respected his experience, and slowly but surely, he began to see what Olivia had seen in him all along. One evening, as he was finishing up some paperwork in his office, a young mechanic knocked on the door. "Hey, boss," the kid said, looking nervous. Jake smirked. "Boss? Still getting used to that?" The mechanic chuckled. "Yeah, well, I just wanted to say thanks for giving me a shot. I was struggling to find a job before this, and if you hadn't taken me in, I don't know where I'd be." Jake felt something stir inside him. He had been in that position once, desperate for an opportunity, unsure if anyone would take a chance on him. Now he was the one making that difference for someone else. "You earned it, kid," Jake said. "Just do your best, that's all I ask." As the young mechanic left, Jake leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had spent years believing he was just a small-time mechanic, someone who would never escape the struggles of his past. But Olivia had seen something in him that he had never seen in himself, and now he was finally starting to believe it too. This wasn't just a job, it was a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Jake knew he was exactly where he was meant to be.